Previously on Monday, we talked about 4 possible definitions of what a human can be, and we learned that really none of them perfectly fit the bill. In fact, the definition of what a human is actually increasingly ambiguous with more information that we learn. Today's video is going to be further answering that question of what is a human, and the question, where did we come from? So looking back in Monday's video, we had 2 definitions that were the first 2 that I mentioned. Anything that's alive in the genus Homo is considered a human. That was the first definition, and the second one was anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Both these definitions, if we choose to abide by them of what a human is, give us a relatively straightforward answer. The humans have arisen through millions of years of evolution and natural selection. But I hinted at this in the previous episode that humanity has something unique about it, and the fact that we can abstract think, we can communicate, we can do calculus. These things are really the defining characteristic of what it means to be human, and those are not accounted for in either of those definitions. That really moves us to the other 2 possibilities of what the definition of humanity is, number 3 and number 4. These are behaviorally modern humans that are able to, again, philosophize, do calculus, communicate, abstract thinking. And I've mentioned this before on this channel, that language was such a huge part of the development of abstract thinking. So we're going to really ask ourselves and zero in on this question. If we're going to understand where humanity came from, the humanity we see today, we have to answer the question, how did the capability to abstractly think come from? Because that's really the most unique characteristic and the defining characteristic of what it means to be human. Today we're going to be talking about 3 different theories that kind of attempt to explain the explosion of human evolution. Number 1 comes from Graham Hancock, is going to be psychedelics. Number 2, evolution. And lastly, number 3, which we're going to focus the majority of our time, is on creation, specifically the archetype of Adam and Eve. Graham Hancock in his book Supernatural presents this theory of how psychedelics helped awaken humanity into consciousness, into abstract thinking, into language. Graham Hancock uses the comparison of a cognitive dam. He claims that human evolution led up and created this big dam, but it wasn't until psychedelics were widely used that this dam was broken and enabled abstract thinking in humans. Some of the evidence he suggests is that the first paintings, which is a clear demonstration of what it means to abstractly think, were used by people in areas where psychedelic mushrooms and psychedelic plants were very prevalent. It also makes sense to think that hunter-gatherers would eventually, it's just a matter of time before they would run into these psychedelics. And a lot of the early languages we see develop, and especially the early religions, are in areas where psychedelic plants are extremely, extremely widespread. For more information on that, I'd highly recommend reading Graham Hancock's Supernatural. There would be a link in the description if you'd like to check that book out. Next theory is going to be the theory of evolution. This theory suggests, as with most things in evolution, that the evolution of language and abstract thinking was a slow, gradual process. As hunter-gatherers started to form larger and larger communities, the need for language went up and up with each added individual. This increased use of language due to more congregated individuals led to more abstract thinking, more innovation, and developed that characteristic human ability to abstract think that we think of today. The last theory we're going to be touching on is creation. And now this is a huge theory that we've seen across tons of different cultures, tons of different religions especially. That's the theory, or really the story of Adam and Eve. And by Adam and Eve, I'm not necessarily referring to the Christian story, although those are their names in that story. A more general idea of any religious culture, religion or culture that holds a similar belief in that Adam and Eve, there's a first primary couple that was created or picked from a larger population that everybody today is related to. And that's why we are so unique. That's where humanity's key characteristics come from. So we're going to divide this theory into 3 smaller parts. The first one is the theory that Adam and Eve were created as a distinct modern couple. This suggests this individual couple that was created was behaviorally modern to us today and anatomically modern to the humans that they coexisted with. A good way of explaining this would be that they were humans among animals, and that eventually their line would have to replace all of the humans that existed back then, including Homo sapiens. Furthermore, this attributes consciousness to a creator, and that Adam and Eve would be the first 2 individuals to have consciousness, and they pass that on through their genes to their relatives and to all of humanity, and that's where we come from today. Another way of putting this is that the uniqueness of Adam and Eve in this sense is not only genealogical, but it's also genetic. However, there are quite a few problems with this theory. One is that there's no evidence that humans today evolved from a small group of people, especially two people. Modern day genetic evidence suggests that our population of ancestors never dipped below 10,000 people in the past 100,000 years. Furthermore, this challenges the worldwide flood theory that's often presented in many of these different cultures because, again, the population never dipped down to below 10,000 people. Furthermore, genetic relatedness is irrelevant. If we did have this couple that was genetically significant because they were born and lived such a long time ago, we would not even be related to them. The next part of this theory is that Adam and Eve were a uniquely created identical couple. This suggests that they were uniquely created, but they were identical to the population of people that they were in. This makes them genealogically significant, but not genetically significant. This theory suggests that Adam and Eve would then teach consciousness to their children eventually, but it would kind of sprout out of their genome rather than their immediate consciousness at the time of their existence. In order for Adam and Eve to be related to everybody, they would have to kind of marry in and mix with a group of people that were already alive at the time. There's no real evidence against this theory because genealogical relatedness doesn't go back that far. Ancestry.com hasn't gotten the information yet from the hunter-gatherers of who their ancestors were. I'm just kidding. However, there is a little sliver of evidence for the theory. Genealogically, we are related to everybody more than 5,000 years ago living in the Middle East. However, you can see this as positive or really insignificant evidence because the fact that we're related to everybody doesn't make Adam and Eve very special in this sense, only if they were truly created, but science is completely silent on whether or not this has occurred. The last part of this theory is that Adam and Eve were a couple picked from a larger population. Again, their uniqueness would not be genetic, it would be genealogical, and they would eventually give birth, establish the line of people that exist today. However, they wouldn't have been created. Instead, they would be picked and kind of endowed with this future capability of consciousness that would be given unto their ancestors. So when answering the question of where modern humanity came from, clearly it's extremely tricky. Evolution obviously is the predominant theory, but it doesn't explain the evolution of humans into the ability to abstract think. At least I don't think very well. A sudden burst, a huge break of a cognitive dam isn't characteristic of natural selection and gradual evolution over millions of years. Other theories like psychedelics and creation come in to try and fill in those gaps. Graham Hancock's theory on psychedelics is extremely powerful and helps us see the entire conversation from a different light, and absolutely is a possibility for how humanity obtained the ability to abstractly think. The theory of creation is also an extremely interesting theory, something that's been widespread and communicated and written down for thousands of years. One of the first stories ever talks about creation, specifically of an Adam and Eve type of character. However, there are problems with this theory as there isn't enough positive evidence to suggest that Adam and Eve really did exist. When answering the question of where did humans come from, it seems like we have a ton of different options, either psychedelics, evolution, or creation. And those are just the ones that I've heard of, and I'm sure there's hundreds more. I think one of the main things that we've learned through these two videos is what it means to be a human. Anatomically, it's not that significant. It's the behaviorally. How we behave is so much more important. How we have the ability to think is so much more important than our evolutionary history to get us in the bone structure and the physical structure that we are in right now. If you want to follow this conversation on what it means to be human, where did humans come from, where are we going next, make sure to subscribe here to Alice.